tell you that because it was always a date, there was no choice. I don't know. It just happened that way, and as I say, I think we got to the point, perhaps not as clear as the third act as I wanted it to be. And obviously we pissed off some people for other reasons, but they were going to be pissed off anyway. For me, I can't answer that question. It grows. It ended. It's over now. I'm happy. I'm going to go on and I'm happy. I know enough people around the world. It did very well abroad, I think many of you people here tonight, I think that you see that there's something more afoot here than some people saw.
I have to ask the question because so many people made such a big deal about it, even though personally when I was watching both versions of the film, it's like, why is this being blown so far out of proportion? But the whole issue of Alexander's sexuality, this was an important plot, or at least character point. What was it about his character that led you to have this as such a prominent portion of the way you portrayed him on the screen?
Well, by example, I remember we had a 340 BC, and then it became 320 BC, and somebody said, "Well, how can they go backwards?" You got to deal with the mentality of some people who just have a problem with this is a cultural war right now about our bodies, what we do with them, what's proper and what's not proper. It's basically, I think, an offshoot of the old Puritan versus practical American approach. It's just these two in conflict forever. So there's something very strange in this country about sexuality, and I guess it's because we don't have it on movies or television. We have violence instead, and we accept that. What was the video game story last 2 weeks? Sexuality is the big issue, and I'm shocked because in Europe and even in South Korea, where they have a taboo about homosexuality, it was far more accepted. And in this country, it was like the only issue. The whole movie was about that. I only saw headlines, Alex the gay, It cheapens the whole damn thing. And it reduces his life to a teenage joke, a teenage sexuality issue. I literally, my son, who was at college, told me that kids his age would walk out at they say, ugh, I can't, ugh. It's, I don't know, I loved Wedding Crashers, but Vince Vaughn gets almost raped by a boy in this, and I think that horror that he expressed is sort of a horror that, obviously it was comedy, but there's some kind of fear, and it's, I don't notice it abroad. I just don't. People aren't threatened by it. Even in Turkey, for Christ's sake, we did great business in Turkey. What more macho society is there than Turkey?
And to me, one of the things...
And by the way, Lawrence did have a little bit of it too,
We're talking about Lawrence of Arabia, for those of you that didn't catch on. To me, the whole thing was just blown way out of proportion because while it was an element in the film, it didn't seem to me nearly as prominent as the press would have you believe. And did that surprise you?
Well, it was the homosexuality, the wigs, the accents, you can tear anything apart, anything, if you want to concentrate. But if you don't look for the whole, you're not being constructive.
We have a question from Heather Hale here. Heather is in the front row. We can get her a DVD. What was, you used the recurring visual theme of the eagle flying. Did you consider that to be a symbol of Zeus, or was that a different symbol for you?
No, it's both. It's ambiguous because Zeus's eagle is also the eagle that eats Prometheus's liver. Prometheus is the achiever who helps man. I think what we're propositioning to try is that Alexander was a friend to man. He says that about Prometheus at one point. He's a friend to man. I think Alexander did well for the human race. He contributed greatly to it. He sought at the highest, like Icarus, sought to be the highest level and paid the highest price. His insides were eaten out. In the last scene in the film when he's dying, I very much see in that bird coming from the fan, from the Persian fan, That bird becomes, of course, a form of the eagle that's sent by Prometheus. His father is calling him back. And of course, you see that imagery in the cave. I don't know if we overdid it. I just, the eagle, in my point of view, omens were very important to the Greeks. They had continual daily sacrifices. And Alexander sometimes believed them and sometimes he didn't. But there were signs of omens all the time in the ancient world. And I take the eagle, it's only seen like 4 or 5 times to be one. It was also an interesting way to shoot the battle, by the way, because it's an extremely complicated battle. Some people won't understand it, but if you look closely where the eagle is, it does tell you. I guess you have to look at it on DVD, but if you can trace the battle logically through the eagle.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's... How many of you here have seen the theatrical version? About a third of you. One of the big differences between this version and the original version is the fact that the theatrical version is told in a much more linear fashion, where in this version of the story you bounce back and forth a lot more. This is a question from Mike Simarudi. Where are you, Mike? Up in the top. So what advantages do you feel you had by shifting from a linear to a much more nonlinear?
Well, it was the way it was written originally. First act, he conquers Babylon. He goes to the top. The second act, he marries. This is a key event in Alexander's real life because he married, of all people, 10 years too late, he marries a Bactrian princess called Roxanne. The historians don't go over that, but it seems like he's cutting his own throat. He's insulting his people. The heir to the empire, so to speak, is now going to be a half Asian. How can you get out of a hole like that without the... It's incomprehensible, the mess he gets himself into. He ignores his mother's advice completely. So the second act, to me, is this marriage and the implications and the fight with the generals. Ending, and the third act, it opens up now. After the marriage, he has this relationship that you see in more detail with his mother and his father. And you get to the point of this thing, which is this assassination of Philip is a big issue. Who killed him? No one will ever know. It was like a Lee Harvey Oswald situation. But the fact is that there's tons of motives. Darius had a motive. But the mother's reaction, of course, always set off a tremendous amount of speculation. And she could easily, and the Greeks hated them too. Who knows? The point is Alexander had to suspect his mother, and he had to have some involvement to some degree, even if he was innocent. And through his mother's acquiescence in this murder, because she mocked Philip openly and praised the murderer, she praised the murderer publicly. Through his mother's acquiescence, he himself becomes part of this parasite, or whatever you want to call it. Clytemnestra killed her husband. Orestes killed his mother, but Oedipus killed his father. And Oedipus is another character in there.
Do you think there was an Oedipal relationship between Alexander and...
No doubt, and that's before Freud. Some critics criticize this as Freudian psychology, but I laugh because all of Freud's stuff comes from the Greeks. What was I saying? So anyway, the whole backstory is fascinating to me about Alexander's near madness. What I'm saying, the most important scene in the movie is perhaps when he goes up against the elephant. He never wants to lose that battle. He kills himself to win, and he wins. True story. Never lost a war. Napoleon lost. Julius Caesar lost. I don't know if, no, Caesar never lost, but he won late. But the point is, Alexander is the greatest military commander. And West Point will even tell you this. So he saves the day at the price of his life. What's the last thing he thinks of? His interview with his mother after his father's death. And this ambiguity emerges, and the mother says, fuck it, take the power. It's yours. You love it. Be the king. Don't grieve. Don't give me this guilt and all this bullshit. Be a king. I love her strength. That's why Angelina works for me. She's a dominant woman, and she's a strong woman, knows what she wants, and she's completely against the modern grain. Anyway, that sets off, and then we cut back to India, and what happens? He's alive, but he's dead. He's been resurrected. You see him, he's completely white. Walks out, he says, men of Macedon, we're going home. Pause. And then the men cheer, and you see his face, and he's dead. Because home for him is the mother. Home for him is death. He knows he's dying. So it's a strange moment, but that's what it's about. It's somehow I think that Philip's, his father, maybe I'm crazy, but his father's assassination, his mother's possible acquiescence, have a lot to do with Alexander's doubts about himself. And his doubts drove him to his greatness. And I think in India he earned his mantle by his near death, by sacrifice. And I think that's why we had that image of the father's ghost coming back out in India to sort of bless him, to approve of him, to make him a divine. He looks up at the eagle at that point, and of course the eagle is leaving forever.
Matt Markwalder, where are you, Matt? Yeah. Matt wants to know, and actually I do also, the choice of Vangelis as your composer, because music is so often almost like another character in the film, and I think that's definitely the case here. Talk about your collaboration with Vangelis.
It was great. I mean, when you make a movie like this and you accept the concept, the license of heightened drama, perhaps heightened dialogue, the gesture, the almost silent film gesture. When you go that direction, I like visceral, powerful music in general, but I went for the most powerful man I know. He was a Greek. He understood the Greek mentality. When you go to Vangelis' house in Athens, from which he barely ever leaves, by the way, you'll find statues on every level. He's got a roof garden, which is unbelievable. It's like dining in an ancient Athens in the summer. Vangelis is a true Greek in his soul, and he understands. He wrote this music. He wrote so much music, and unasked for. He poured out of him and poured out of him. And I went with it. I went with this sweep, the grandeur. Some people will hate it, but I love that. For this kind of movie, I think you got to go for it. You don't become a minimalist here.
Last question of the night. Do you see yourself more as a writer or as a director?
It's a process. And it's a process. Hopefully you get a little better. One leads to the other. In this new movie, I'm not the writer. The script came to me, and it was the first time I've ever had such a great script in my face like that.
This is the movie that you're in pre-production on now?
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us what you're up to with?
Not really. I mean, it was announced, but it was 9/11 story about two Port Authority policemen who were a true story, who went through hell. It's a great story, great values, everything simpler, obviously, than Alexander. But it's going the opposite way, from this nobility down to this grit, this view of hell from which these men emerge.
I'm sure we have some. How many of you in the audience are writers? How many of you are directors? How many of you are just fans? For the writers and the directors of the audience, do you have any advice or words of wisdom?
Oh, if you could write and direct, get a video camera, digital camera, make it cheap, make it good. Underestimated by your opponents or the people who are blocking you is sometimes in your favor. Surprises, refreshes. People always need to be refreshed, reminded that the ordinary is magic. So I would go for the lower budget film, frankly, unless you're in a position, it's so hard to do the other, and try to surprise people.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our guest, Mr. Oliver Stone. We have a bit of business here. We'll sit here for just a second. We're going to draw a card to get one of the posters from tonight. Oliver, if you would please pull a card from the bowl.